It started on a cloudy morning in Essex when Ant Anstead got behind the wheel of a shiny Ford Mustang he had just fixed up. He never thought one simple test drive would change his life forever. For years, people all over the world watched wheeler dealers and admired his calm, precise hands as he brought old cars back to life. But something went horribly wrong that day in 2018. A broken brake line made the Mustang fly off a country road, crashing into hedges and breaking wood. Ant lived through the crash, but it broke more than just the chassis. It set off a chain of events that would torment him for years to come. The picture of Ant dragging himself out of the wreckage went viral right away. His hair was matted with grease, his clothing was shredded, and his eyes were bloodshot from shock. Fans startled when they saw their favorite host lying on top of broken steel, holding a piece of his own work like it was a lifeline. Headlines made big claims about his near-death crash and wondered what would become to wheeler dealers without its leader. But there was a deeper tragedy beneath the sensationalism that no camera could really capture: the break of trust between man and machine and the start of a personal fight he never saw coming. To Ant, vehicles weren't just metal and pistons, they were something that held memories and meaning. Each time he turned a bolt, he thought of the weekends he spent with his dad tightening lug nuts on a small driveway in Newport Beach. Those echoes of laughing that they all shared were the cornerstone of his enthusiasm, creating a link that went beyond horsepower. Seeing the Mustang explode into mayhem was like seeing a part of himself, childhood aspirations and whispers from his father, break apart on the side of the road. He just got a few cuts and bruises, but the emotional scars were much worse. He couldn't sleep at night because his dreams were full of grinding metal and skidding tires. Every time the engine revved or the brakes squealed, it brought back memories of that brief betrayal. His heart, which had been calmed by the steady beat of the cylinders firing, suddenly tightened at every turn. And when he was ready to go back to the set, fear seemed like a heavy hood over his shoulders. The production team of wheeler dealers had to quickly change things. Safety rules were made stricter, insurance costs went through the roof, and the timetable, which typically operated well, fell apart under additional scrutiny. But the real cost came out off-screen: Ant's rising uneasiness. Getting into the driver's seat, cranking the engine, and cruising down deserted lanes used to feel like second nature. Now they were psychological tests. His usual smile was gone, and he was concentrating so hard that he resisted the impulse to freeze every time he changed gears. The crew's comments about how quiet he was only made him feel worse. He thought he had let down the machines he loved. But the accident was just the first act. As the months went by, Ant learned that tragedy has a way of touching every part of life. His first marriage fell apart because of sleepless nights and restless days. Conversations that used to be full of plans for big buildings evolved into quiet talks about therapy visits and medical expenditures. His wife, facing the shadow of the accident, looked for stability in other places. The divorce got as much attention as the accident. Tabloids followed every court appearance, breaking down the settlement amounts and custody arrangements for their little boy. It was a sadness that happened all too often. Another wreckage was shown to the world via big headlines. Ant worked hard to forget about the past. But the store didn't give any help. Every time he hit the metal with a hammer or welded it, he could see it tearing and rubber burning. He started to avoid restorations that were too risky and instead chose easy solutions that wouldn't push him too far. Producers saw that he was hesitant and thought about firing him because they were afraid this accident would hurt wheeler dealers' reputation for doing crazy technical things. Ant could feel the fault lines getting bigger beneath him. Was he still the most important part of the program, or was he now out of date? Then the day came when a choice had to be made. A blue 1967 Pontiac GTO, a classic muscle vehicle, drove onto the lift. A retired veteran who owned it begged Ant to help him fix the car that had brought him home from war. That request cut through dread like a spark through gas. Ant stood in front of the GTO like he was looking at himself, hurt, bruised, and full of stories that needed to be spoken. Even though his hands were shaking, he said yes. This wasn't just another episode, it was a reckoning. For the next few weeks, cameras recorded every weld and every spin of the wrench. People watched not only to see the Pontiac change, but also to see Ant change. They witnessed him stop in the middle of welding, take a big breath, and then hoist the torch again. They saw that he was steadying his hands with purpose and that his eyes were clear with the determination to face his fears. When he finally started the engine for the first time, the deep rumbling felt like a victory over fear. But the horror wasn't over yet. Fans didn't realize that the crash had also hurt Ant's inner ear, which made him feel dizzy at random times. As he crawled under the GTO during a live shoot, the ground slanted, causing him to fall. As Ant lay there breathing and the world whirling, a cameraman ran to his side. Doctors said he had labyrinthine concussion, which is a hidden lesion to the brain and bones. They warned that another head injury might be deadly. Ant fought with the bitter irony behind closed doors. The work he loved was suddenly bad for his health. He was at a crossroads. He could keep fighting robots that let him down, or he could leave the show that made him famous. He would have to give up part of who he was no matter which way he went. His wife's leaving and his health crisis had already taken hold of his heart. Now, the noise from the store threatened to drown out the last bits of happiness he had left. The cameras caught his choice. Ant said goodbye to Wheeler Dealers, the show that had been his home for 7 life-changing years. After his heartbreaking departure from Wheeler Dealers, Ant had to deal with a world of empty garages and quiet motors. The sound of a repaired V12 engine was replaced with the echo of a choice that affected every part of his life. He faced the deepest machinery of all, his own uncertainties. There was no comfortable buzz of cameras or cadence of wrench turns. When he walked into the empty workshop, it felt both familiar and strange, as if the walls knew the old Ant but didn't have room for the new one. Every socket seemed to whisper memories of what he had lost, and every quiet automobile body seemed to call him back to think about it. But he wouldn't go back. He gave up the high-stakes restorations for quiet partnerships, working with local artisans and fabricators who had little workshops that weren't connected to the grid. There were no cameras filming these meetings, no deadlines, and no producers watching from behind screens. Instead, Ant and his new team worked together and learned that restoration might be a way to relax instead of a race. They took apart an old Fiat 500, scrubbing every hinge and polished its rounded body till it shone like a memory. As Ant told anecdotes from his boyhood about learning how to change spark plugs with his father, his laughter came back, low and real, under the soft light of the hanging lamps. He put together more than simply the mechanics of an automobile with each precise tweak to the carburetor jets. He put together the pieces of his own damaged confidence. Ant faced the silence left in the devastation of his personal life while he repaired his relationship with the craft. His divorce had closed a chapter he never wanted to finish, and not having family dinners with people he knew was hard. He started going to support groups for people who had been through traumatic events. There, he would sit in a circle with strangers and listen to them talk about their own physical and emotional wounds. At first, he listened, not wanting to bring up talks he had been trying to forget for a long time. But with time, he came to understand that mending wasn't a trip he could do on his own. Sharing his crash, from the loud sound of metal grinding to the ghosts that tormented his sleep at night, got rid of the humiliation that had been there like rust. He laughed at tiny wins in the soft light of the community center, driving a restored Triumph Bonnie around twisty roads without flinching or getting behind the wheel of a classic Mini without grasping the wheel like it was a lifeline. His small victories started to open up new doors. He was asked to be a guest host for a live restoration event at the Goodwood Festival of Speed, which is a famous event for car lovers and industry luminaries. The offer seemed scary. One wrong move or moment of doubt could undo months of development. But Ant said yes, determined to get back to his place in the spotlight with the same calmness that had always distinguished him. When the cameras started rolling and the people gathered around his chosen project, a rare Porsche 356, he took a slow breath, put his gloved hands on the hood, and smiled. As he took off the body panels to show off the car's old parts, he felt more and more sure of himself. He used the engine bay as a stage to show that being vulnerable and being an expert can go hand in hand, and that tragedy doesn't have to eclipse skill. By winter, Ant's schedule was full of invitations to give talks at both automobile and mental health conferences. His reputation had changed. He was no longer just the calm fixer of old cars, he was also a voice for people who were dealing with invisible wounds. He told stories that connected metal and mind in speeches given to well-dressed crowds in metropolitan auditoriums. He talked about the sound of gears that used to put him to sleep and how he understood that his hands could build engines and fix a broken mind. He said that treatment was like tuning a machine, with each conversation and coping strategy acting like tightening a bolt until the machine worked well again. Hundreds of people stood up and applauded when he finished by putting his hands together in thanks. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Ant felt a calm surge of purpose that no TV show credit had ever given him. In the spring, a familiar voice called. A broadcaster wanted him to co-host a new Wheeler Dealers special, but this time with severe safety rules in place. Ant paused because he was afraid of the collision, but he saw a chance to change his tale. When the cameras rolled, he greeted the new host with calm authority, offering counsel tinged with empathy. He felt a change as the engine sputtered to life in his careful hands. Fear and honor were riding together. Hope found a peaceful home in his heart at that moment. Then came the announcement that seemed to seal his fate: Wheeler Dealers will go on a world tour of restorations, documenting the rescue of endangered classics from faraway places. Fans lined up to see each episode, anxious to see how Ant turned rusty old cars into rolling gems. At first, it seemed like a dream come true, a chance to get his reputation back on a big platform. But Ant recognized that this meant giving up the safety of small workshops for long trips and tight deadlines. He stopped, his heart racing, as he looked over the schedule: far-off places in Mongolia, gravel roads in Patagonia, and deserts in Namibia that were too hot to touch. Could his body and mind handle another crash course in extremes? The stakes were higher than ever when it came to feelings. He couldn't shake the memories of the Mustang crash, which were like a ghost hitchhiker. He remembered when the brakes failed, the automobile went out of control, and his heart was caught in a mute scream. After the brain injury, he had to deal with vertigo and constant migraines. Doctors said that stress and physical trauma could bring those symptoms back, maybe for good. But as he saw the world stage in front of him, fans chanting his name and cameras ready to catch every wipe of grease, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: the raw exhilaration of possibilities. He chose to keep going, thinking that overcoming fear again would solidify the next part of his comeback. There was a lot of planning going on before the rehearsals started. Ant's first stop was a junkyard outside of Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, where old Soviet-era jeeps were half buried in grasslands. The people who worked there spoke bad English and offered noodles and the cautious compassion of strangers. Ant walked through the yard like a general checking out battlefields, with a map in hand and a plan in mind. He told the video crew that the purpose was not only to fix these cars but also to honor their history. They were once tools that helped herders navigate the harsh steppe, but now they are relics that are in risk of rotting away. His voice barely shook once, when he talked about how machines had saved his life and how he wished to do the same for someone else. The people in the area were amazed when he pulled panels, used his trusty torque wrench, and got engines running again. Ant laughed with joy and relief as the rebuilt Jeep roared to life under the great Mongolian sky. The following stop was a workshop in Patagonia, Argentina, at a high altitude. At night, the temperature dropped below freezing. The problem here was an old Land Rover that had taken scientists to the tops of glaciers. The engine bay was a museum of dirt and old wiring. Ant's hands shook from the cold as he took out rusty bolts and brittle hoses that were sealed. One morning, he woke up with vertigo in his head and the studio whirling around him. He leaned against a fender to steady himself, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead. A medic came with a stethoscope and some advice: if he felt dizzy again while working, he had to stop right away. That night, Ant was alone in his tent and peered at the ceiling canvas. Doubt started to sneak in. Was he putting everything on the line for one last chance at fame? Or does this mission throughout the world have a bigger goal than just saving himself? He kept on, determined to finish the tour. A caravan of land cruisers that had been bringing relief supplies to Namibia for decades was on its way to a dusty settlement. The people there clapped shyly for him, their hands dirty from years of work. Ant knelt next to a broken engine block and carefully loosened the bolts. His thoughts went to the families whose lives these trucks had formerly affected, kids who had gotten medical supplies and farmers who had taken their products to market. He understood the bigger picture at that moment. Restoration wasn't only about the value of old things, it was about giving communities new life. When he started the last Land Cruiser at sunset, its boom resonated across the crimson dunes and the sand that was blowing around. Ant closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of doubt leave his shoulders. The last stop on the tour in the UK was a big reveal at Silverstone Motor Circuit. TV hosts and famous car racers came together under the huge roof, expecting a show. Ant brought out the repaired classics, lined them up like a museum display under floodlights, and went down the tarmac while cameras clicked. He stopped with the microphone in hand at the last revelation, which was a perfect Morgan three-wheeler. His cheeks were sunken in, and his eyes looked tired. The crowd cheered louder and louder as he talked, his voice steady even though he was tired. These machines saved lives, carried history, and we've given them a second chance. They show us that resilience isn't only about metal and grease. It's the heart behind the wrench. The crowd cheered, but Ant felt a trembling behind the cheers. Had he gone too far? Days later, when the part was shown throughout the world, he snuck backstage next to the mirror in his dressing area, shut the door, and sat down on a bench. The adrenaline that had kept him going was gone, leaving only empty energy. He looked at himself in the mirror. Grease smeared across his forehead, and his eyes shone with both triumph and trauma. He silently accepted the truth. His body carried the marks of a man who had raced fate and won, but who had also risked losing himself in the hunt. He understood that the price of worldwide fame was something he couldn't ignore any longer. Ant called his therapist that night. He talked in short, broken sentences about the disorientation he felt in Mongolia, the migraines he had in Patagonia, and the extreme tiredness he felt after Silverstone. He said he had made the tour's success seem more important than it was and had ignored his body's signals. He cried as he admitted he was afraid of letting his fans down and witnessing his comeback fall apart. His therapist listened and then added softly, "You haven't shown your worth by how often you run toward danger, but by knowing when to back off. Restoration starts within." Ant let out a breath and felt lighter. The next morning, he made up his mind. Ant said on social media that he would stop filming for an indeterminate amount of time because he needed to focus on his health and well-being. Fans and co-hosts quickly filled his page with messages of love, support, and thanks for being honest. He felt a rush of relief, but also regret for the shows he would have to leave incomplete. But in that weakness was a fresh victory. He had restored balance to his life by choosing to protect himself instead of putting on a show. Ant Anstead's journey goes on, but not on camera. It's in the quiet rev of a repaired engine, the measured breath before a wrench turn, and the honest discussions that bring healing. His tragedy changed him, showing him that sometimes the only way to heal is to do it yourself. After declaring his extended vacation, Ant switched TV teams for peaceful mornings in his private workshop. He put soft LED lights over his workbench and traded in high-octane restorations for tasks that helped him regain his confidence. Every day started with a slow routine, herbal tea, 10 minutes of guided meditation, and a series of balance exercises to help him retrain his inner ear. He proceeded slowly, paying attention to each step and breath, until the sound of traffic in the distance became a background sound instead of an alarm. He learned that taking things slowly may help him restore himself just as much as tightening a bolt. His friends and family came together to help him. His son, who had been distracted by court dates and uncertainty, suddenly occupied a corner of the bench, where he shared stories of schoolyard victories and gave out tools. Their laughter resonated through the workshop like music that had been lost and found. Ant knew that he could rebuild trust, piece by piece, as he let his son's hands over spark plugs. He stopped rushing to meet deadlines and instead let components sit in the sun until his hands were ready to polish every curve. He spent days beneath a cloth with a 1969 Triumph Bonneville as he relearned how to breathe and how to gaze at metal without flinching. With therapeutic devastation came invites that were not expected. Local support groups invited him to lead hands-on healing seminars, where he would show veterans, accident survivors, and nervous newcomers how to balance pistons. With his help, they realized that aligning engine parts was like aligning emotions. Each smoothly working cylinder was like a mind that was free of turmoil. Word got around, and soon Ant's workshop was in the news for fixing hearts as well as automobiles, not just for terrible crashes. People sent him a lot of thank you comments on social media, including, "Watching you tighten that gasket gave me the courage to face my own breakdown." By the middle of summer, the tool business that had formerly tried to get him to promote their products approached him to help design a line of low-impact wrenches for people with hands that were recovering from stress or injury. He drew ergonomic shapes late into the night and then tried out prototypes on both old carburetors and difficult lug nuts. At the same time, a mental health charity invited him to co-host a series of webinars that looked at similarities between emotional and mechanical limitations. His voice, which had been quiet because he was afraid of relapsing, sounded real and authoritative as he talked about broken brake lines and broken hopes. Then he demonstrated viewers how to fix each with care. Ant agreed to speak at a worldwide wellness summit in Barcelona in October. Under soft purple lights on stage, he talked about the accident, the painful aftermath, and the vertigo that still sometimes danced behind his eyelids. He talked about divorce as another devastation to get through, and how he spent restless evenings tinkering with pistons till daylight. When he was done, the crowd stood up and gave him a standing ovation that sounded like the loudest engine roar he'd ever heard. He drew up concepts for a memoir and handbook called Life in the Slow Lane, Brake Lines and Breaking Points in his workshop. He planned chapters on how to deal with crises, both emotional and automotive, and drew pictures to explain how tightening a bolt was like tightening the limits of a relationship. Each page promised to be a set of tools for anyone learning how to fix something that was broken, like an engine or a shattered heart. Ant's new rhythm felt normal by the time winter came. Sunrise yoga turned into mornings at the bench, and nights turned into live chats where he talked about how things were doing with his Datsun Roadster and his recuperation. Gone were the adrenaline-fueled sprints of televised restorations. In their place stood a craftsman who had learned that true resilience comes not from how quickly you run, but from knowing when to pause, breathe, and concentrate. And even though he still loved the visceral thrill of a roaring engine, he now knew that some of the best restorations happen in the spaces between the gears, in the quiet chambers of the human heart. He found himself at a crossroads again when a well-known automotive streaming service asked him to host a revival series called Rebuild and Recover. The idea was simple: seasonal mini-episodes featuring 3 builds, each based on a car owned by a regular person who had been through a major life change. The idea hit home right away. Ant thought of a format that was like his own journey, cars getting better along with their owners, with each turn of the wrench representing a personal breakthrough. He thought of a classic Chevy Camaro whose owner had survived a stroke that almost killed him, or a worn-out Datsun 240Z owned by a veteran with PTSD. The series would mix stories of people being strong with mechanical skill, showing both pistons and personal victories. He agreed to the first season with cautious optimism, determined to keep the balance he had worked so hard to restore. In the early spring, production started. Cameras quietly recorded each thorough oil change and measured torque in Ant's private workshop, which was turned into a soft-focus studio. When he was on Wheeler Dealers, the cameras rolled 360 degrees and the producers chased exciting moments. Here, however, he was in charge. The camera angles were low-key, the edits valued real dialogue over dramatic cliffhangers, and each show ended with options for mental health treatment. He was warmer and less contrived on television. He talked directly to the audience and talked about his personal journey from crash survivor to coach for both Steel and Souls. His signature grin had turned into a mentor's smile, with his arms open to both the people in the room and the people watching. Maria, a young mother, appeared in the first episode. Her old Land Rover was a lifesaver for her everyday tasks, but it broke down as she was fighting breast cancer. Maria told Ant and his crew what the Land Rover meant to her as they worked on the rusty brake lines and seized wheel bearings. It was a vehicle that had taken her kids to school and her to chemotherapy appointments. When the engine eventually started up again, her tears shone in the workshop lights. Ant sat in the driver's seat with his hand on her shoulder and said that sometimes healing is just a spark plug away. Filming ended without any fanfare, but the emotional impact spread through online forums where people shared their own stories of recovery. Richard, a retired firefighter, was the star of episode 2. His cherished 1973 Plymouth Satellite had been his personal therapy after years on the fire line. Richard lost both his mechanical interest and a way to deal with trauma when the car's transmission broke. Ant and Richard worked together to take apart the gearbox, and Ant showed Richard how to fine-tune the shift points while Richard told Ant stories about scary rescues. The steps involved in rebuilding were similar to those involved in healing, taking things apart, evaluating them, fixing them, and putting them back together. On the day of the test drive, they sped down an empty airfield, and Richard's headlights shone like a soldier coming home. Ant's heart soared when he saw a man get his horsepower and hope back. In the last episode of the first season, Ant picked his own Phoenix project, a 1965 Ford Falcon that was the last car in a friend's family. His father had owned the Falcon, then his brother got it, and then it sat in a neighbor's barn for a while. Ant said he would fix it, but he also knew that he was rebuilding more than just metal. While he was welding hairline cracks into the frame, he talked openly on camera about how the Mustang crash had shaken his trust in machines, how his divorce had shaken his faith in love, and how, in return, he had welded a new creed: to believe in change. As the Falcon's engine roared to life, Ant drove it to the shore at sunset, which was a symbolic journey from broken pasts to strong futures. The response from viewers was better than expected. People from all over the world wrote in, saying things like, "I've faced my own wreckage, watching Ant guide each rebuild gave me strength to pick up my own tools, and this is the true spirit of restoration." Ratings were through the roof, and more importantly, Ant's email was full of thank you messages. He understood that by being open about his own weaknesses and working with others to develop things, he had created a new legacy. This legacy was not based on chart positions or spectacular headlines, but on fixing both machines and minds. Halfway through filming season 2, a non-profit contacted us to work together on a mobile garage project for rural areas that don't have repair shops. Ant plunged himself into making lightweight toolkits, teaching local volunteers basic first aid for both mental and physical health, and earning money through live-streamed build marathons. People who watched may provide money to help pay for toolkits or psychology workshops that went along with mechanical clinics. Ant thought that physical and emotional healing should be on the same axis, and this idea represented that. By the conclusion of the season, he had helped start mobile units in a number of areas that didn't have enough services, from villages in the Scottish Highlands to communities in the California desert. Ant felt a big change after the second season finale, when a repaired VW Beetle was given to a cancer survivor. He was no longer worried about ratings or scared every time he pressed the throttle. Instead, he was part of a worldwide group that found healing in the sound of hydraulics and the clink of spanners. He went back to his workshop every night, not with fear or an adrenaline crash, but with a sense of quiet satisfaction, notes for next week's builds, messages from participants, and pages of his memoir guide taking shape as a model for others. His public story had come full circle, from the thrilling crash that broke his confidence, through times of denial and reinvention, to a manner of restoration that combined steel and soul. Ant Anstead used to tame engines to prove his worth, but now he teaches that real repair starts in the heart and spreads outward via wrench turns and stories told. He had learned that the best build isn't always the automobile you drive away in, sometimes it's the one that takes you home. At morning, he sits by a warming mug and reads over chapters of his memoir and guidebook manuscript. The headline "Life in the Slow Lane" shines at the top of each page, like a promise and a belief. He reads parts about how to handle a crisis and how to fix things, and each chapter connects the two with mechanical and emotional perfection. As the kitchen light gets brighter, he underlines a passage on how torque settings show personal limits, being careful not to tighten too much. A text message comes in on his phone. It's from a former soldier whose refurbished Jeep he gave him as a gift. It now operates perfectly. The letter says, "Thank you for giving me my confidence back," which is a reminder of why he made his new program format. He shuts the laptop and heads to his workshop, where the afternoon sun shines through the big windows. The benches are full of tools that have been used on earlier projects, and each wrench is a chapter in his recuperation. Soon, he will conduct an online masterclass on how to gently wrench hands that are hurt or stressed. He plans to have a webcast Q&A tonight and asks his followers to talk about both mechanical problems and mental health issues. His agent calls and interrupts his thoughts, asking him to co-host a benefit gala to raise awareness about road safety. He agrees since he knows that pushing for safer driving is important to him because he was in a car accident that almost killed him. The event will have restored cars and open chats, with soft lights shining on the metal and memories. Later that afternoon, he helps his son tune the carburetor on an old Mini by showing him how to make modest changes. As he talks about fixing automobiles with his dad when he was a kid, their laughter fills the workshop. He is thankful for this chance to teach others and develop trust when he used to feel damaged. When night falls, he joins a virtual panel with other therapists and restoration professionals to talk about how to heal via craft. They talk about how aligning engine parts is like aligning how we feel when we're stressed. Each person tells a story of how they changed, and their voices parallel his own path from trauma to stability. He knows that community and connection are just as important as any mechanical repair at times like these. He goes outdoors as the night becomes darker and hears waves smashing on the other side of his fence. He takes a deep breath and remembers the first time he felt the ocean air after the crash that changed his life. That recollection used to make me panic, but tonight it makes me feel completely at rest. He makes a silent commitment to himself. He will never give up these times of calm satisfaction. In his study, he reads fan mail from people who rebuilt more than just cars with his help. One letter talks about a teen who found peace in learning how to fix a lawnmower and found a new purpose in life. Another tells the story of a single mother who replaced her own brake pads and her own sense of control. These stories give him strength from the inside, showing how powerful it is to be open and honest. He shuts the drawer that holds memories, including old scripts, faded pictures from past shows, and a broken headlight lens. Each thing tells a story of struggles and victories, of the youngster who almost disappeared and the man who is now determined to live. His next endeavor is a small number of workshops that he will run alongside rehabilitation clinics. He imagines mobile toolkits that have both wrenches and tips on how to take care of yourself to help with anxiety. This two-pronged strategy will take care of both the machines that are rusty and the souls that are hurt. He practices demonstrations on a portable engine test bench in his garage a few days before he leaves. He videos parts of a tutorial on how to stay cool and focused while tightening bolts, showing how to breathe between turns. After filming is done, he watches the tape with a sense of pride. He sees a frame where his hand shakes a little when he starts up cold, which reminds him that he is still recovering. He doesn't hide it, instead, he leaves it in the final cut to show that progress isn't always perfect. At midnight, he writes an email to the people who support him and work with him. He appreciates them for giving their time, tools, and advice to projects that restore more than just metal. He asks them to join a virtual event to celebrate the start of the series and tell their own stories. He closes his laptop with a contented sigh and turns out the lights upstairs. He puts earplugs by his bed in his bedroom as part of a routine to make sure he can sleep without being disturbed. He reads a poem about waves and strength before bed. The lines sound like the rhythm of his life. He falls asleep feeling like he has a new purpose, ready for the start of another day full of gentle wrenching and shared healing.